Glenn Geher is professor of psychology at the State University of New York. He's won awards there, written several books, published dozens of papers. He's legit. But he thought one day, what's going on? His university has stopped one speaker from giving a lecture. Then a bunch of staff and students were furious that the famous Jonathan Haidt had given a lecture there suggesting that your political bias might affect how much you believed in free speech or academic freedom or even facts. And Professor Geher and his team decided to study just that and whether being a man or a woman made any difference. I spoke earlier to Professor Glenn Geher. This particular study started with the visit of Jonathan Haidt, who's not a red-of-tooth conservative, who's not a bomb thrower, who's not a provocateur. He came to university and delivered a lecture. What did he say and what was the reaction?
So Jonathan Haidt came in September of 2016, and this was, as you're suggesting, Jonathan Haidt is not a fringe player in academia by any means. About a month before, he was the keynote speaker at the meeting of the American Psychological Association, which is as elite an honor as you essentially can get in our field. So it wasn't like we were bringing in a fringe speaker, someone who was considered a crackpot or anything. He's considered a very elite thinker and researcher in the field. So he came in and he gave what I thought was a brilliant talk about the conflict that universities experience regarding whether they differentially emphasize knowledge seeking or the advancement of knowledge, the attainment of truth, versus advancing an agenda connected with social justice. And he essentially argued that these are somewhat irreconcilable goals, that if you're advancing a social justice initiative, you cannot really concurrently be advancing a truth-seeking initiative because these things often conflict with one another. He provided lots of evidence, lots of data, lots of examples, and I just sat there fascinated and thought, wow, this is great. And then kind of after the event, I turned around and people were furious. And I was very surprised. I was like, wait, this was a great talk. What's everyone so angry about? So that was the specific situation that really led to the research that we ended up conducting.
So you did your research. What was your finding?
So our team sat down and we really wanted to sort of, quote, get to the bottom of this. So we designed research that was about the issues of what Jonathan Haidt was talking about. And we essentially looked at the values of academics or the values of professors. And we came up with 5 values. Of course, you could make the case that there were more. These aren't the basic ones, but we did our best. And one of them was social justice. So how much do you value social justice? One of them was knowledge advancement. One of them was student emotional support. So how much does it matter that we're supporting our students? Another one was academic rigor, and another one was academic freedom. In terms of political orientation, there was a very big effect for whether people identified as relatively liberal or relatively conservative. People who reported being relatively liberal were more likely to value social justice and more likely to value emotional supporting students. And people who identified as relatively conservative were more likely to report that they valued academic rigor and advancing knowledge. So those were kind of the big effects. On top of that, and so we did a whole bunch of statistical things to sort of tease these apart as independent findings. On top of that, male professors were more likely to follow the way that conservative ideological folks followed. So they were more likely to care about advancing knowledge and academic rigor. Women were more likely to value social justice and emotional stability. There was also an effect for field of study. So people that were in the business school, which interestingly happens to be where Jonathan Haidt is at NYU, New York University, people in the School of Business were more likely to say, I care about academic rigor, academic freedom, and knowledge advancement, and I don't care about that other stuff. People in the School of Education and in fields like humanities were more likely to say, we're here because of social justice and supporting our students emotionally. And very briefly, in terms of personality.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Professor, but in short, it seems that you're saying that people who identified as conservative said, give me the facts. People who identified as progressive or of the left were saying, no, I'm concerned about the feelings. And when it comes to male-female, same sort of split. I'm simplifying, of course, and generalising. That's provocative to some people. That in itself is, facts versus feelings. How do we feel about that news? What happened when you try to get it published?
So I just have to say, Andrew, I'm just going to say that putting this, simplifying it, boiling it down in terms of facts versus feelings, I think captures it really, really well. So I think that you're exactly right that that's to an extent what this boils down to. I know when something is capable of being published academically or not. If I were a brand new PhD and something got rejected, I'd maybe say, oh, maybe they were right. Maybe this wasn't very good. But by the time that we tried to publish this research, I was a reasonably seasoned academic. And I had a team of very strong, bright students working on this with me. We had the best statistician, one of the best statisticians that I've ever worked with as a student, Julie Planky, did all our stats, and she presented these and ran these A+. We did a very comprehensive literature review. It was a very sharp paper. And we submitted it to a few academic journals. Usually a decent academic paper, it might take 1, 2, or 3 journals before you get accepted. Getting accepted right out of the gate is not usually the norm. So if you get rejected by 1 or even 2 journals, okay, that kind of happens. Then it got rejected by a 3rd journal. Then it got rejected by a 4th journal. I had another student, Jacqueline DeSanto, and her job was to clean these up, look at the reviews, make revisions, send it to the next journal. And after about 8, 9, or maybe even 10, we kind of sat down at the table and looked at each other and we're like, this isn't going to happen. We could send it to like the lowest tier journal in the world. And it really had this feeling of, it was just not going to happen. So kind of through this process.
What's happened? This is the cancel culture. And the thing is, I think you should be pleased because in a way it sort of confirms exactly your research, because a lot of those journals, of course, tend to be where, they're under the control of people who are of the liberal persuasion. And I don't know that your conclusions were ones they wanted to hear or felt socially useful. So anyway, look, I think it's been a fascinating insight, and I thank you so much for explaining it to us.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it, and keep up your great work, Andrew.